Hey guys, tonight we trudge into a dimly lit courtyard behind the ancient ziggurat where the amber glow of oil lamps shivers against cracked mud brick walls and incense curls like lazy ghosts in the warm air. You probably won't survive this plunge into dusty antiquity without coughing up a clay tablet or two, but hey, that's half the fun of unearthing millennia-old secrets. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. I promise I won't judge if you're watching from a hammock in Bali at midnight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step past a row of painted masks propped against the wall, each one frozen in an eternal grin or grimace, their clay surfaces alive with wedge-shaped cuneiform characters that curl around eyes and mouths. The air is thick with half-forgotten prayers. The stage beyond is bare reed mat and broken pottery shards. But to you, it feels sacred, like the curtain barely conceals a conversation between mortals and gods. Mainstream fact: the Sumerians developed cuneiform around 3400 BCE to record grain rations and royal decrees, laying the groundwork for written civilization. Yet here you find those same wedge strokes dancing across masks, not tablets. Historians still argue whether this crossover was purely decorative or something more ritualistic. Some nights feel like stepping into a ghost story, told by a flickering torchlight. You trace your finger along a mask's edge, feeling ancient grooves where terracotta meets pigment. Fringe tidbit: a handful of loopy scholars claim actors whispered into these masks, believing the inscriptions could convey secrets directly to gods like a 5,000-year-old Instagram DM. It's probably nonsense, but imagine the selfie potential. Here's me and Ishtar hanging out in the underworld, yea. The distant murmur of priests and musicians filters through reed-woven doors. You inhale, the scent of frankincense mingles with the earthy tang of wet clay. There's a rough edge to the ritual plaster spills onto sand tools clatter, and an apprentice hisses at you to mind your sandals. Yet the atmosphere hums with anticipation. Tonight's play might reenact a myth of Inanna's descent or Gilgamesh's exploits. And those masks aren't mere props. They're characters in their own right. Notice how the cuneiform isn't random. Each cluster of wedges names a deity or motto. Ea, grant me voice, or may Nana bless this performance. Mainstream fact: Sumerian theater often intertwined with religious festivals like the Akitu New Year rites, where masks embodied gods and historical heroes. You can almost hear Inanna's laughter echo as clay lips part. A soft breeze stirs nearby reeds, carrying the sound of distant drums. You lean forward, heart thumping in sync with your own mental soundtrack, half expecting one of those masks to blink. Gentle sarcasm creeps in. Don't worry, that mask with the bulging eyes isn't judging your internet search history, probably. The flickering lamplight casts long shadows, turning every carved wedge into a slanted eyebrow or snarling jaw. You shiver in that perfectly cozy way, excited, mildly terrified, and oddly soothed all at once. Modern aside, it's like watching a horror movie on VHS where the grain makes everything scarier and more nostalgic. If you squint, you almost see symbols shifting the sign for light, for protection, for truth, dancing across clay. Historians still argue whether those painted symbols were meant for the audience, the actors, or the gods themselves. Were spectators reading aloud during the show? Did priests chant from memory toward the heavens? Or was it simply eye candy to show off a patron's wealth? The debate lingers like incense smoke. You crouch to examine an abandoned mask, its cheekbones highlighted in red ochre lines of cuneiform swirling around the forehead like a crown of thorns or maybe laurel leaves. Nobody's quite sure. Fringe theory. Some think that color choices corresponded to vocal intonations, red for rage, blue for sorrow, so actors could glance at their own masks for emotional cues. Honestly, that would save a lot of rehearsal time. The stage beyond is silent, but you sense movement. Wooden drums being tuned, reeds being straightened, a priest humming. You run a palm gently over a mask's cracked surface. The clay is cool and rough, as if it remembers every performance. A stray spark from a brazier kisses the edge, and for a heartbeat, you believe you catch a whisper. Tell them we're still here. Modern ASMR whisper lean in. Feel the grit of history between your fingertips, the weight of countless voiceless stories clinging to ancient pigment. There's a thrill in knowing you're witnessing a living tradition, masks that carried cuneiform not just as decoration, but as active participants in 1,000 festivals. You rise, heart still fluttering like a caged dove. 3 jokes in, and you've already teetered on the line between scholarly deep dive and cozy campfire tale, just how you like it. You might even imagine taking one home as a quirky souvenir, though the guards frown on artifact smuggling. And that's a hard no, if you want to keep all 10 of your fingers. Tonight, your journey begins here, in that smoky courtyard among clay faces painted with language. That's the opening ritual, the prelude to a story where mask and script merge, where performer and divine whisperer overlap, and where you, dear listener, become the bridge between ancient hands and modern ears. So take a steadying breath, settle deeper into your pillow, and let's venture onward together. You crouch again among those clay masks, remembering the smoky courtyard's hush. And now you cradle a damp handful of river mud in your palm. The cool, pliant lump yields under your fingers like dough, only stickier, with infinitely more archaeological baggage. As you knead it, the scent of wet earth and sun-baked silt swirls together. It's like the world's oldest stress ball. Fringe tidbit. A fringe theory claims some performers whispered their lines into raw clay lumps, believing the material would memorize every syllable like a prehistoric voice recorder, though you might want to fact-check that before trying it at your local pottery studio. Mainstream fact: Sumerians tapped their great floods of the Tigris and Euphrates to collect clay, then refined and stored it in reed baskets for daily use in writing and craft. Historians still argue whether this reverence for clay stemmed from its practical abundance or a deeper belief in its living quality. The Sumerians didn't just treat clay as inert mud, they saw it as the Earth Mother's body made manifest. According to myth, the goddess Nin-Hursag shaped humans from clay-breathing life into each figure, a narrative that cast clay as a divine conduit between gods and mortals. This gives context to why clay wasn't merely a writing surface, but a tactile sacred sponge for human expression. Modern aside, it's kind of like thinking your laptop keyboard was forged from dragon scales over the top. But you can't deny it. Makes typing feel epic. Historians still argue whether performers fasted or recited incantations over clay before kneading, suggesting a ritual enrichment that might have been dramatic or purely symbolic. As the lump yields to your touch, you imagine how that same material served dual destinies, inscribed tablets for scribes and sculpted masks for actors. Each use required different consistencies, stiff enough to hold wedge-shaped strokes, yet soft enough to mold into expressive features. You compare it to customizing your gaming controller. One moment you need rigidity, the next, a cushioned grip. Joke break. Clay has 0 calories, so feel free to snack on your creativity. Just don't actually eat it. Your dentist will hate you. Fringe whispers suggest some actors even wore wet clay directly on their skin, believing it connected their breath to the earth, though dermatologists today would probably file that under questionable skincare. To prep the sacred medium, artisans dredged up fine clay from river shallows, then sieved it through reed mats to remove grit and pebbles. They mixed in water until the texture matched a creamy paste worthy of mask making or tablet tooling. Imagine whipping up pancake batter at 4 a.m. Only the recipe demands perfect consistency for that one shot in your cooking show, minus the blueberries. Mainstream fact. Once-shaped tablets and masks were often fired in wood-fueled kilns at around $900 degredo, ensuring their inscriptions survived floods and centuries. Historians still argue whether ceremonial masks were fired alongside economic tablets or in specialized shrines, hinting at possible guild secrecy. As you pat the final lump into a flattened disc, you notice its warm terracotta hue, the same color palette you saw in those masks, from deep ochre cheeks to crimson eyebrows. The air carries the tang of drying clay, like stepping into a rustic pottery barn after rain. Actors might have inhaled these scents as part of their prep ritual, grounding themselves before a performance. Joke number 3. At least clay masks don't come in one size fits all. You just squish and reshape, no awkward eBay returns required. Fringe theory. Some scholars posit that artists added crushed shell or straw to clay, believing the inclusions could imbue masks with spiritual texture, though evidence remains scant. Feel the weight of that disc in your hand and think about how this same substance became a living canvas for Sumerian creativity. It held royal decrees one day and divine epithet the next. It joined grains of truth with grains of mud. You sense why they believed clay was enchanted material, bridging Earth's depths and human ambition. As you set the disc beside a mask rimmed in cuneiform, you realize clay wasn't just medium or metaphor, it was actor, canvas, and silent storyteller all at once. You lift that fired clay disc from the shaded bench its surface, now as smooth and cool as the masks you handled earlier, and you remember the sharp tang of terracotta as it left the kiln. But long before masks wore cuneiform like cosmic tattoos, those wedge-shaped strokes, first scrawled across flat tablets to keep track of barley shipments and temple inventories. Mainstream fact. By around 3200 BCE, Sumerian scribes had standardized cuneiform on small clay tablets to record economic transactions, creating one of the world's earliest writing systems. Historians still argue whether pictographic roots or proto-cuneiform signs evolved first. Some think the earliest marks were literal drawings of livestock, while others insist they were abstract signs from day one. Imagine a scribe hunched over a sloping wooden desk, reeds in hand, earthen tablets piled beside him like unread mail. He presses the reed stylus into damp clay, leaving neat rows of triangular wedges, each wedge a tidy data point for the temple's paperwork. The air in that scriptorium smells of inkless pulp, sun-warmed clay, and the faint sourness of fermenting dates in storage jars. Fringe tidbit: a handful of eccentric researchers believe some scribes imbued their tablets with personal author marks, tiny doodles of animals or mythic beasts hidden among economic figures, like a cryptic clay-based Easter egg hunt. You might channel your inner Indiana Jones, except you're more likely to trip over reed baskets than whip out a fedora. You trace an imaginary line from that cramped scriptorium to the open-air theater where actors later wore masks inscribed with the same wedge forms. Think of it as a technological pivot. Administrative tool becomes artistic flourish. Modern aside, it's like turning your office spreadsheet into a neon sign above your desk. Suddenly, your TPS reports are performance art. Historians still argue whether the shift happened organically, as scribes moonlighted as artisans, or through formal guilds that handled both tablets and masks. Feel the progression under your fingertips. First, tiny tablets, roughly palm-sized, then larger narrative tablets with epic tales of Gilgamesh, and finally, fragments of clay masks where cuneiform curves around eyes like decorative filigree. Mainstream fact: by 2100 BCE, narrative and legal tablets contained myths, legislation, and hymns, expanding cuneiform beyond mere accounting into literature and ritual. That same versatility made it ripe for embellishing performance props. Fringe whisper: some fringe enthusiasts suggest that the very texture of curving a mask's cheekbones influenced how scribes adapted their wedge angles. Claiming clay curvature led to new shorthand strokes, though most experts roll their eyes at that one. Close your eyes and imagine a clay tablet slapped down on a reed mat. Then envision a mask framed in sunlit sand. You feel the change in energy, from bureaucratic precision to performative flair, from ledger to legend. The mask maker had to repurpose the scribal symbols, stretching them to curve around hollow eyes, bending registers of text to follow a jawline. That required both scribal finesse and sculptural skill. Mainstream fact: some mask fragments excavated at Ur show clear evidence of detailed cuneiform painted with red ochre, likely naming characters or invocations to gods. Historians still argue whether those inscriptions acted like theater programs identifying roles for the audience, or covert magical directives for the deities themselves. You might worry about clay's fickle nature. Tablets could be wiped clean and reused, while masks demanded permanence. So mask artisans often used pigments over fired clay, painting cuneiform in pigment that clung like lipstick on a stage face. Modern aside, it's the ancient equivalent of printing a one-off poster. Rather than typing out a Word document, no delete key, no undo, only bold commitment. Fringe rumor: a few overly dramatic scholars claim actors sometimes repainted masks mid-performance under hooded timbrels, as if touching up makeup between TikTok takes. Probably not practical, but picture the chaos. Imagine walking through an excavation trench at dusk, your headlamp illuminating half-buried tablets and mask shards. The battered tablets record temple taxes. The mask pieces bear tiny wedges looping around chipped eyes. A thrill runs through you as if you found a forbidden crossover episode. The tactile contrast is striking. Tablets feel thick and blocky masks, thin and expressive. Each wedge on a tablet sits in neat columns. On a mask, it grazes a curve hinting at a cheek or brow. Mainstream fact archaeologists uncovered mask fragments in layered temple refuse pits at Nippur, suggesting ceremonies regularly discarded or ritually buried old masks. Historians still argue whether those pits marked the end of a mask's career or served as consecrated deposits for retired ritual objects. Lean closer, and you'll hear the clay whisper its story from scribe's ledger to actor's visage, from private record-keeping to public spectacle. Fringe theory. Certain mask wearers believed that painting cuneiform over seams and cracks sealed the mask's spirit, preventing cracks from speaking unwanted words. It's dramatic, maybe a bit extra, but you have to admire the flair. This evolution wasn't instantaneous. Generations perfected wedge angles on flat surfaces before daring to wrap them around clay faces. You can almost feel the scribal apprentices bristling. Wait, you want me to write on a mask? That's not proper form. And yet art and ritual tend to follow their own appetites. Actors sought more immersive experiences, temple patrons desired grander spectacles, and scribes grew bored of accounting alone. Imagine the tedium of endless barley tallies, joke brag. If you ever catch yourself calculating your pizza slices per hour, ask if it's time for a career change into Sumerian theater. Hark! Your fingertips sense the finesse required for curved inscriptions. Drag the stylus in one wedge, then press another to create a compound sign, all while minding the mask's hollows. It's a delicate dance, like decorating a pumpkin for your next Halloween event, only the stakes feel higher and the audience rather less forgiving. Mainstream fact. Textual analysis of inscriptions on masks shows formulaic blessings. May Anu guide your voice, or let Enlil shield your steps, indicating these inscriptions doubled as both labels and protective charms. Historians still argue whether audiences read these blessings aloud as part of the performance, or whether they remained silent invocations. You stand in that twilight excavation zone breeze rustling through date palms overhead. You hold a mask fragment inscribed with Nin-Hursag, vivid in black pigment against pale clay. You feel connection across 5 millennia, a scribe's precision, an artisan's creativity, an actor's breath animating a mask. Modern aside, it's like holding the first draft of your favorite movie script while wearing a superhero mask. You're part witness and performer all at once. Fringe whisper. Some late-night theorists argue that mask inscriptions served as mnemonic devices for actors with poor memories, like the ancient equivalent of ear prompter notes. We'll never know for sure, but it does make for a fun image. So that's the journey of cuneiform, from flat tablets of grain counts to living canvases of theater masks. From dusty administrative rooms to open-air festival stages, those wedge strokes leapt off ledges and found voices in clay. You sensed the transformation in your bones, an evolution of function and flair of record and ritual of temple bureaucracy reshaped into divine theater. And as you tuck that narrative into your mental archive, you realize you've crossed another bridge, understanding how a dry tool of commerce became an enduring art form, smoothing the path for storytellers across ages. You slip between the leaning masks once more, your fingertips brushing the cool clay edges as you recall the sharp curves of cuneiform from flat tablets to theatrical faces. Now you're embarking on a journey of shape and form. How did those humble, once featureless mud molds evolve into expressive canvases that could make an audience laugh, weep, or squirm with suspense? Grip the edge of a reed mat, settle into that ASMR-friendly posture, and let your mind trace the mask's metamorphosis. Mainstream fact, early Sumerian masks, dating back to around 3000 BCE, were rudimentary, often simple ovals with eye and mouth holes used in funerary rites and religious ceremonies before they ever dared to grace a theater stage. Historians still argue whether these proto-masks were originally worn by priests during temple rituals or by community members during seasonal festivals. The ambiguity lingers like incense smoke wafting through the corridors of scholarly debate. Imagine an apprentice potter molding a basic oval slab, poking two eye holes with a reed stylus and cutting a crude mouth slit with a sharp flint blade. The surface, unadorned, raw, and brilliantly utilitarian like a blank canvas waiting for its first splash of color. Fringe Tidbit, a cluster of offbeat researchers, claims that some early masks were scented with crushed herbs, lavender for calm rue, for protection to enhance the wearer's aura. Essentially, ancient aromatherapy meets performance art. You may want to sniff your pillow and wonder if lavender could help with story retention. As performances grew in complexity, from simple lamentations to myth reenactments, masks needed more than hollow eye holes. Artisans began sculpting raised brows, pronounced cheekbones, and stylized hair ridges that could convey emotion even under a flickering torch. You feel the clay curves under your fingers as if the mask itself flexes a sinewy brow at your skepticism. Modern aside, think of it like upgrading your phone's face recognition camera from low-res to 4K Ultra. Suddenly, every smirk and scowl registers in exquisite detail. Joke break one. If only our Zoom call filters could capture that kind of drama without crashing halfway. Joke break two. Imagine reporting for duty in a Sumerian sitcom. Hey boss, I'm running late because my mask's cheekbones weren't vertex optimized. Joke break three. And you thought your last cosplay effort was high maintenance. By around 2600 BCE, mask artisans introduced contours for nose ridges, lip curls, and ear flares, using small coils of clay pressed together like miniature snakes. They'd smooth seams with wet fingers or reed brushes, then carve grooves for hair or beard patterns. Mainstream fact evidence from finds at Kish shows masks with elaborate facial details suggesting they represented specific deities or legendary figures rather than generic personae. Historians still argue whether those details were standardized by guilds or left to each artisan's whimsy. As you gaze at a richly detailed mask fragment, you note the remnants of color, faded reds, ochres, and traces of lapis-like blues lining engraved curls. These pigments weren't simply decorative. They highlighted sculpted features, adding depth and mood. A raised lip, tinted dark, would read as a sneer, a shadowed eye ridge as a weary gaze. That interplay of shape and hue created a living caricature under stage lights. Fringe whisper. Some mask wearers allegedly hid tiny mirrors or polished shells in the mask's eye sockets to catch glints of light, giving their gaze an otherworldly sparkle. It's almost too theatrical to believe like ancient paparazzi lenses, but it does explain why a few masks seem almost luminescent when struck by sunbeams. You might try this trick at your next evening event. Just don't trip over the tripod. Remember the kiln's warmth you felt last section. That same fiery furnace solidified the mask's features permanently. Fired at high temperatures, clay lost its moisture and recorded every sculptor's fingerprint ridge, your tactile breadcrumb trail through time. After firing, artisans sometimes added a thin layer of fine plaster to smooth imperfections before painting delicate cuneiform around eyes or along cheekbones, turning each mask into a hybrid of sculptural prowess and calligraphic finesse. Now, envision a theater scene, a procession of actors armored in robes of dyed wool, clutching wooden props, each wearing a mask that communicates character before a single word is spoken. A mask with exaggerated downward brows and a frowning mouth instantly signals grief or doom. One with upturned lips and wide eyes promises humor or satire. Mainstream fact Sumerian performances during the Zagros rain festivals often featured masked clowns, tragicomic figures who delivered both social commentary and comic relief. Historians still argue whether these clowns were satirical mouthpieces for oppressed classes or purely for entertainment. You lean closer to a mask carved with a wide grin, noticing how the clay around the mouth curves upward like a permanent smirk, almost as if it's mocking you for taking history this seriously. The painted cuneiform at the Temple of Nana reads, "Let laughter ward off Kutha's shadows," hinting at a belief that humor had protective power. Fringe tidbit. A few inscribed lines admonish the actor to never break character, suggesting performers risked divine backlash if they laughed at the wrong moment. Now that's stage fright. There's a dynamic interplay between mask morphology and storytelling nuance. Subtle changes in ridge height or eye depth could alter how light and shadow played across the face, guiding audience emotions. Modern aside, it's like using contour makeup on Instagram. Highlight here, shadow there, and suddenly engagement soars. The Sumerians harnessed the same principles millennia ago, sculpting and painting their way to audience immersion. You drift your hand along a mask's sharp jawline where cuneiform twists like vines of language. Those curves weren't accidental. Artisans studied facial anatomy perhaps by observing the faces of actors or priests, then exaggerated features that read well from distant wooden benches. Mainstream fact. Some masks discovered in Ur showed asymmetrical features, one brow higher than the other, likely to convey character complexity or inner turmoil. Historians still argue whether asymmetry signified moral ambiguity or technical mishap. Joke break refresher. Think of it as the original cinema's slow zoom. By tweaking one side of the face, they zoomed in on emotion. Then again, maybe the artisan simply had a Monday clay slump. Speaking of slump, that reminds you of the fringe theory claiming that some mask makers chewed on clay to test its consistency Definitely not OSHA approved. As the final glow fades on your imaginary lamp, you stand amidst half-buried mask fragments, tools, and splatters of pigment. You feel the evolution under your skin from plain oval cutouts to emotive, almost lifelike sculptures. Each mask's morphology tells a story before the actor even utters a line, a testament to human ingenuity and the power of visual communication. You grasp why those shapes mattered. They bridged the gap between scripted word and shared emotion. So, as you lower your hand from the last mask, let that transformation settle in simple A to B progression from quick funerary props to dynamic theater canvases. Remember the whisper of clay from your fingertips, the flash of painted lines, the flicker of torchlight on sculpted ridges. You've witnessed how form and function married to amplify storytelling, setting the stage for centuries of masked performances to come. You cradle the mask against your cheek, feeling the cool heft of fired clay pressed lightly into your palm, and you notice those neat lines of cuneiform curling around the forehead like tiny runes of power. There's an almost electric hum between your fingertips and the clay. Call it ASMR or ancient witchcraft, but either way, it's oddly soothing. Fringe tidbit: some experimental archaeologists swear that if you recite a blessing into the mask's ear holes, the painted words shimmer under moonlight, as if energized by your voice. Though most skulls in the attic skeptics chalk that up to candle flicker and a pinch of hysteria. Mainstream fact: the Sumerians routinely inscribed incantations and protective formulas on amulets, cylinder seals, and foundation pegs to ward off evil and curry divine favor. So why wouldn't they do the same on theater masks? Historians still argue whether those painted scripts were meant for the mask wearer's psyche, the gods overhead, or simply as showy status symbols for temple elites. Imagine you're an actor preparing for tonight's performance of Inanna's Descent. You slip your head through the mask's neck hole and close your eyes, breathing in the faint scent of ochre and reed fiber binder. You whisper the invocation lined at the temple of Eridu. May Enki's waters wash away fear, and you swear the letters glow just a fraction brighter. Modern aside, it's like updating your phone's security software and noticing the battery life jumps back up 30%, pure psychosomatic bliss. But who's complaining? There's a ritual to it. Priests anoint the mask with olive oil before painting murmuring prayers so low you almost miss them. The oil darkens the clay and helps pigments adhere, but the mystical framing gives you goosebumps like layering pentacles for a hipster-themed Halloween bash. You run a finger along a line of painted wedges above the eye hole. Those aren't random song lyrics, they're protective curses and blessings calibrated to each character. May Nergal's shield guard your voice for warrior roles. May Nasaba's wisdom guide your tongue for priestesses. Joke break one? It's the ancient world's original safety first policy hard hat. Optional clay mask, mandatory. Each mask becomes a walking talisman, a portable temple that travels from ziggurat courtyard to open air stage. You almost expect it to hum like an overclocked video game console. Remember that fringe theory in Section 2 about apprentices whispering lines into raw clay? Well, this is the next level of painting. Living words onto the finished mask so that every performance becomes an act of magical reinforcement. Mainstream fact. Texts from Ornamu's code include passages that reference the potency of written spells, claiming that a properly inscribed curse can bind a demon for 7 years. Historians still argue whether theatrical inscriptions held comparable legal force or functioned as purely symbolic reenactments of those legal and ritualistic spells. You lean closer, your breath fogging the clay like steam on a winter window. You can almost hear the echo of Sumerian priests chanting, "Seal this mask against deceit. Let no shadow touch your truth by the tears of Utu, banish all lies." The effect is immersive. You're not just watching a play, you're participating in a communal exorcism of doubt and fear. Actors would sometimes circle the mask 3 times, dipping a finger in consecrated water and tracing each cuneiform sign as if charging it with electricity. Fringe whisper. A few radical theorists propose that masks were used as vessel metaphors, allowing spirits both benevolent and malevolent to inhabit the performer, all governed by the inscriptions that bound or invited them. It's like plugging your brain into a USB port labeled Divine Interface, but absence of pop-up windows. You imagine the audience's perspective as straw mats rustle and drums beat the mask's approach like silent ambassadors of the divine. The painted words catch the torchlight flicker across dusty faces and imprint themselves on every watcher's retina. There's a collective gasp when the priest-actor pauses, tilts his head, and those wedge forms align like a spoken sentence. Joke break 2. It's theatrical eye candy, except instead of buttery popcorn, you get spiritual popcorn. I recommend a light snack beforehand. A child in the front row might squint and ask, "What does it say?" But elders whisper back that reading it aloud might break the spell or, worse, invite a god to hijack the next scene. You can almost taste the incense haze as you slip your hand into the mask's hollow jaw. The inside is rougher, unfired clay smudges your palm, reminding you of the living earth from which it came. That tactile contrast underscores the mask's dual nature part, art object part, enchanted relic. Mainstream fact excavations at Girsu uncovered masks deliberately buried next to hearths, their inscriptions facing inward as though to trap residual energy after a festival ended. Historians still argue whether those burials marked a respectful retirement ritual or a fear-based containment of magic gone rogue. As you lift the mask from its resting place, you see faint smudges where oil dripped onto cuneiform lines. Over decades, tiny patinas of ritual wear like coffee rings on a pub table. Every drip creates a micro-abrasion in the pigment, a reminder that these masks weren't fragile museum pieces, but living companions through countless enactments. Fringe tidbit: a handful of performers believed that each drop of oil created a memory layer, so they'd layer fresh paint, yearly building up concentric bands of power, like accruing reward points in an ancient divine loyalty program. You pause, letting the mask rest against your chest heart, thumping in quiet sync with distant framed drums. You feel the gravity of those painted words, not decorative afterthoughts, but active wards designed to channel divine protection, ensure vocal projection, and even regulate mood. It's theater, yes, but it's also precautionary magic, crowd control, and communal reassurance all rolled into one. Modern aside, it's like wearing noise-canceling headphones that double as a stress ball, multitasking at its finest. Let's not forget the scholarly fracturing. Some argue that inscriptions were primarily didactic, reminding actors of lines or cues rather than magical. Others insist the power lay in the act of painting itself, an embodied prayer, rather than the symbols. Historians still argue whether the magic was in the ink, the incantation, or the interaction between the two. Your mind buzzes with possibilities. What if the real spell was the communal belief in the spell? You set the mask down gently, your fingers lingering on its painted rim. The cuneiform forms look less like text now, and more like a delicate web spun to catch all that could go wrong, a safety net woven out of words. Fringe rumor, late-night storytellers claim that if a mask's inscription line was mispainted, performances would be plagued by forgotten lines, stage props collapsing, or runaway goats. Though goats on stage were probably someone's bad idea, not divine retribution. Take a breath and let it out slowly, letting that whispered tension dissolve. You've held an object that merged art, religion, and proto-theater tech into one potent tool. Actors, priests, and scribes collaborated across workshops and shrines, infusing each mask with protective intention and performative flair. Mainstream fact, the Neo-Sumerian ruler Gudea is credited with commissioning masks inscribed with hymns to Ningirsu, hoping to secure the god's favor for the city-state, an early example of political theater leveraging religious magnetism. Historians still argue whether Gudea's masks were used in public festivals or sealed away as votive offerings. You lean back, letting the mask slip from your hand onto a cushion of straw. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing that every wedge-shaped line once served as a guardian, a prompt, or a beacon of divine presence. 3 jokes in one fringe theory. To keep you up at night, and an open debate echoing in your mind, just the right mix of comfort and curiosity. As you settle deeper into your pillow, let the protective whispers of those painted words lull you toward sleep, knowing that in the Sumerian theater of the mind, every mask carried its own quiet magic. You lean back against the cool mud brick wall, watching shadows flicker across clay faces, as if those painted brows and cuneiform curls were alive. Tonight's focus shifts from masks as mere talismans to masks as vocal conduits, how Sumerian performers summoned deities by inscribing sacred names and hymns directly onto their visages. You can almost taste the electricity in the air, like the static before a sudden rain, as if the words themselves pulse with divine resonance. Mainstream fact, by the mid-3rd millennium BCE, Sumerians had developed extensive hymn collections, chants to Inanna, Enlil, and Ninhursag that accompanied temple rituals and public celebrations. You find fragments of these hymns painted on mask fragments at sites like Ur and Nippur, where dusty excavation trenches hint at layered festival deposits. Historians still argue whether those inscriptions mirrored the exact temple texts or were abridged theatrical adaptations meant for easier memorization. Your fingertips trace the painted name Dumuzi above a mask's arching eyebrow, the grooves fading under centuries of handling. Fringe tidbit. A few experimental reenactors swear they've heard faint echoes of old Sumerian melodies when they hum into reconstructed masks, like a masked karaoke session from 4,000 years ago. You probably won't survive attempting that at home without earplugs. But imagine telling your dentist you lost your hearing for educational purposes. The painter's hand was crucial here after firing artisans' mixed pigments with binders, reed sap, olive oil, maybe even powdered shells to make vibrant reds, blues, and blacks. Then they meticulously painted sacred invocations across foreheads, cheeks, and chin lines, ensuring each wedge-shaped syllable held both aesthetic balance and ritual potency. Modern aside, think of it as the ancient world's version of Snapchat filters, except instead of puppy ears, you get the divine favor of Utu, the sun god. As you inhale the faint aroma of aged ochre and resin, you picture the ceremony priests anointing masks at dawn, murmuring blessings as incense smoke coils overhead. You step into a courtyard where a chorus of drummers sets the rhythm, and an actor dons a mask bearing the hymn, Enki Karani Enki, grant us wisdom. The painted wedges align along his cheekbones like a script for his soul. Joke, break one. It's theater ritual and a self-help seminar rolled into one, no PowerPoint required. Those inscriptions weren't decorative afterthoughts. They functioned as vocal primers. You might call them clay-based teleprompters. If an actor stumbled over a lyric or forgot a cue, a quick glance at the mask's painted text could save the performance. No awkward ad-libs about, where was I? Imagine Shakespeare with hieroglyphic tick boxes on his cheek, to be or not to be, check box. Mainstream fact-excavated ceremonial masks often carry lines from the hymn to Nana, beseeching the moon god for clarity and calm. These hymns include refrains like "Shine upon us, Silver Lord," likely repainted seasonally to maintain vibrancy. Historians still argue whether these mask hymns were recited by the audience in unison, akin to modern sing-alongs, or reserved for select priest actors behind a veil of secrecy. You cup your hand around a mask's chin and tilt it toward your mouth, testing that intimate connection mouth to clay to text. The act of singing through a mask probably modulated the voice, lending it an otherworldly echo, as if the words traveled through hidden channels. Fringe whisper. A few fringe scholars suggest that priests embedded tiny reed tubes into cheek cavities, amplifying incantations like primitive megaphones, though the only evidence is a pipe dream. Literally, as you wander between masked figures propped on wooden stands, you notice how hymn inscriptions cluster around sensory points near the mouth, for vocal charge above the eyes, for divine sight on the brow, for mental clarity. It's a choreography of text and physiology, a map of magical triggers. Modern aside, it's like customizing your gaming headset with voice-activated Easter eggs, only you're summoning gods, not party members. Joke, break two. Honestly, if ancient deities were on WhatsApp, these masks would be their group chat icons. In Anna LOL. Nice mask. In Lil OMFG. That color combo. Performers likely practiced hours of vocal drills reciting painted hymns until their breath and clay felt inseparable. You imagine the first time an actor donned a new mask, the shock of cold ceramic, the gleam of freshly painted glyphs, the reverberating thrill as voice and clay danced together. It must have been as exciting as slipping into VR gear and hearing your avatar's voice come alive. Mainstream fact. Some mask fragments bear invocation formulas that parallel those on foundation nails, dedicatory objects placed in temple walls to secure divine protection for buildings. Those formulas include lines like, "By the will of Anu, open the gates," almost as if the mask itself functioned as a dedicated cornerstone for spiritual entrance. Historians still argue whether masks were considered temporary votive items or ongoing sacred objects recharged with fresh paint and prayers each festival. You run your thumb over a faint inscription that reads, "Ninmah, the mother goddess, who comforted mortals at birth." Quirky lore says midwives once borrowed these masks during birth rituals, believing the hymn-lined clay could ease labor pains. Fringe theory. Some believe pregnant performers wore masks to physically embody the goddess turning childbirth into a live theater event. Probably not OSHA approved, but memorable for the audience at least. The context of these invocations extended beyond dramatic flair. They were calls to cosmic order, as an actor chanted through a mask inscribed with, "Before the gods, we bow." The audience, drenched in flickering torchlight, collectively participated in re-establishing harmony between heaven and earth. It was communal catharsis, ancient style. Modern aside, imagine your neighborhood block party culminating in everyone chanting, "Alexa, turn off the lights," but louder, with more clay. Joke break 3. And you thought karaoke night was a bonding experience? Try belting out a 4,000-year-old hymn in clay armor and tell me you don't feel closer to the gods. The scholarly debate rages on. Were these painted hymns static, copied exactly from temple scrolls, or dynamic, evolving with local dialects and improvisations? Historians still argue whether performers were authorized, scribes allowed to modify sacred text, or amateurs risking divine wrath with their own poetic flourishes. Your mind spins with the possibilities. Did a comedic actor sneak in an extra wedge stroke to mock a rival deity? We'll likely never know. You shift your gaze to an open-air theater, reeds rustling under the moon. A solitary mask sits on a pedestal, its cuneiform hymn words glowing faintly in your memory. This is where performance and worship intertwine, where an actor becomes a vessel, and the painted names on clay serve as both script and sacred command. You picture the rising drum beat, the hush of spectators, the first syllable escaping behind a clay lip, an invocation that ripples through time. As you ease back into your pillow, let the memory of painted hymns drift through your mind like incense smoke. Feel the gentle hum of cuneiform syllables at the back of your throat, the soft weight of clay against your cheek, the thrill of calling on ancient powers in song. The masks have spoken. Now you carry their echo. You slip back into that familiar courtyard of half-buried masks and smoldering brazier embers, ready to explore the quirkiest corners of Sumerian theater rituals, so offbeat they'd make your modern fringe festival look like a polite church play. Tonight, you'll uncover the customs that lurk just beyond the official liturgies, where masks weren't just props, but participants in bizarre ceremonies that blurred comedy, divination, and occasionally mild legal infractions. Mainstream fact Sumerian theater wasn't confined to grand temples. Smaller fringe performances took place in marketplace squares and private courtyards during seasonal festivals, featuring improvisational skits, satirical monologues, and masked mimes. Historians still argue whether these fringe troupes were officially sanctioned by temple authorities or operated as rogue collectives akin to underground performance art. Imagine a troupe of masked actors assembling at dawn, each carrying a clay mask inscribed with eccentric blessings. May the barley spirits yield a good brew, or may the marketplace weigh your scales true. Fringe tidbit. At one festival, masked participants reportedly played a game of diviner's tag where each mask bore a secret oracle message. If you tagged someone by tapping their mask, you'd announce their fortune to the crowd like ancient improv meets carnival gossip. You probably won't survive trying that in a modern subway car, but how's your tap game? You remember reading about that crocodile dung sunscreen theory, another fringe claim from Section 1 that suggested actors slathered odd substances for performance endurance. Well, fringe theater took that spirit further. Some performers anointed their masks with fish oil to summon the river spirits mid-skit, only to end up with rancid odors rivaling last week's fish market. Joke break one. At least their audience knew the performance was fresh. These offbeat rituals often involved mask exchanges after a comedic sketch actors would swap masks mid-scene, transforming instantly from hero to prankster. It wasn't just theatrical flair, it functioned as social commentary poking fun at rigid cast roles and power dynamics. Mainstream fact-textual fragments from Lagash hint at mask barter ceremonies during harvest celebrations, where masks inscribed with rival town names were traded to cement temporary peace pacts. Historians still argue whether these exchanges were symbolic gestures or legally binding agreements recorded by scribes. Modern aside, think of it as a 4,000-year-old speed dating event, except instead of awkward small talk, you haggle over clay faces. And yes, you'd have to disinfect in between. No one wants your mask after a sweaty shtick. One particularly off-the-wall custom involved the mask mock trial. Actors wore masks inscribed with scandalous rumors, infidelity, stolen goats, public potato thefts, and paraded before a mock judge seated on a mound of grain sacks. The audience served as jury hurling roasted chickpeas as verdict tokens. Fringe tidbit, a literal chickpea barrage could induce minor bruises, leading some performers to rig masks with hidden reeds to play dead when battered, an early tribute to slapstick. Joke break 2. It's like modern improv with pie throwing, but with more legumes and fewer health inspectors. You trace the memory of that mock trial's clay shards in your mind, remnants of masks that cracked under chickpea assault cuneiform tags, proclaiming exonerated by Marduk or guilty as spiced beer. Those shards ended up buried together, a communal temporal capsule of humor and petty grievances. Mainstream fact archaeologists discovered clustered mask fragments in Ur's public square dating to the Ur the Threed period, suggesting some kind of ritual mask deposit after performances. Historians still argue whether these pits were trash heaps or sacred deposits meant to neutralize any lingering mischief Then there's the curious midnight mask. Mimes, small groups of initiates who crept into abandoned temple chambers, placing masks inscribed with love spells on empty altars. They believed that at the stroke of midnight, those masks would whisper the names of one's destined partner. Fringe whisper. A few late-night enthusiasts claim that some modern reenactors still perform this ritual in dimly lit basements, hoping their Tinder swipes improve, though it's more likely they just find the basement less judgmental. Joke break 3. If only clay could swipe right on your ideal match. In some fringe performances, masks served as weather prognosticators. Actors would don masks painted with symbols for rain, sun, or wind, then dance under open skies. If the weather shifted mid-dance, townsfolk took it as a divine prediction. A sudden breeze meant good harvest. Unexpected rain meant upcoming tributes to the governor. Mainstream fact cuneiform clay tablets mention weather masks used by certain priests to forecast seasonal floods. Historians still argue whether these theatrical displays influenced real agricultural planning or were more akin to meteorological theater. You might wonder how these customs remained coherent. Mask barter, mock trials, midnight incantations, weather dances, all seemingly unrelated. Yet the common thread was that each mask's inscriptions acted as an interface between performer's audience and the divine. Modern aside, it's a bit like running multiple browser tabs, shopping, gaming, social media. But each tab communicates with the same internet router. Here clay is the router. Recall the sticky clay disc from section 2 and the tactile thrill of shaping it. Now imagine distributing hundreds of those discs sculpted into masks, each carved, painted, and ritualized for its specific fringe role. The craftsmanship had to be nimble. One moment, you needed a comedic mask to lighten the mood. The next, a solemn mask for oracular rites. Fringe critics speculate that mask workshops worked around the clock during festival season, fueled by date syrup and whatever olive oil wasn't reserved for anointing. Not OSHA approved, but definitely festive. One final offbeat, custom the silent mask parade. Actors dressed in full costume but prohibited from speaking marched through the city streets at dusk. Their clay masks bore inscribed laments or joyous refrains that only the attentive could read. Pedestrians would pause to decipher the wedge shapes, effectively reading a walking clay billboard. Fringe tidbit lovers sometimes exchanged coded messages beneath masks using cuneiform homonyms to slip secret notes past chaperones, ancient Tinder puns, if you will. Historians still argue whether authorities tolerated these silent parades as harmless spectacle or cracked down to maintain public order. The cumulative effect of these fringe rituals was to democratize performance theater spilled out of temples' masks circulated among commoners, and the divine got a cameo in everyday amusements. You sensed the thrill in knowing that, unlike tightly regulated temple dramas, fringe theater embraced unpredictability, inviting laughter, a little chaos, and those eccentric mask inscriptions that made every show one of a kind. As you settle deeper into your pillow, imagine joining that midnight mime troupe mask pressed to altar, waiting for whispered destinies. Picture yourself in the chickpea-pelted skit or trading clay faces in the market square. Let the memory of cuneiform inscription, serious, satirical, or downright silly, dance behind your eyelids. The Sumerian fringe theater may have been small scale, but its spirit echoes in every street performance, comedy roast, and open mic night you've ever attended. So rest easy, dear listener. You now carry the blueprint of the world's first theatrical fringe festival in your dreams. You settle into that familiar alcove of mask fragments and reed baskets, the air thick with the fine dust of dried clay, and you watch a master artisan at work, his weathered hands coaxing curved surfaces into crisp, wedge-shaped precision. It's a slow, hypnotic dance of stylus and brush, each movement deliberate, almost sacred. As the lamplight flickers, you lean forward, eager to absorb every nuance of his technique. Mainstream fact, Sumerian mask makers employed styluses carved from reeds or sharpened bone to incise cuneiform, carefully angling each wedge so it read clearly from every seat in an open-air theater. Historians still argue whether artisans followed strict templates handed down through guilds or improvised each inscription according to personal style. Some believe scribal workshops enforced exact standards, while others see room for individual flourish. Picture the artisan selecting his stylus, a hollow reed cut at a 45-degree angle, trimmed to a fine tip. He tests the point against a scrap of damp clay, listening for the soft whisper as the wedge pierces the surface. The friction between reed and clay sounds like distant rain on reeds, soothing your restless mind. Fringe tidbit: a few antiquarian enthusiasts claim some artisans chewed the reed tip to harden it, giving it extra bite against stubborn clay, though dental records from 4,000 years ago are sadly non-existent. He begins by marking faint guidelines with a blunt-ended tool, sketching gentle arcs that mirror the mask's curvature. Those guidelines keep inscriptions balanced, preventing wedges from spiraling off into indecipherable chaos. You imagine modern graffiti artists sketching outlines before filling in tags. Except here, the tags are sacred names and blessings instead of crew monikers. Joke break one. It's like drawing eyebrows on a potato, but with promises of divine favor instead of starch. Once the guides are set, he presses the reed stylus into the clay, each wedge carved with a crisp tap-angle press, lift, repeat. You watch the clay yield tiny shards, flaking off like autumn leaves in miniature. The process is rhythmic. ASMR gold, tap, tap, scrape, breath, tap, tap, scrape, breathe. You feel your own pulse, slow syncing with the artisan's tempo. After carving, the mask dries slowly in the shade, turning from supple mud to firm terracotta. When it's leather hard, he applies pigments. Mainstream fact: pigments came from ground minerals, red ochre for vitality, charcoal for depth, malachite for verdant accents, and were bound with organic adhesives like tree resin or egg white to adhere to fired clay. Historians still argue whether temperate techniques were local innovations or imported from neighboring cultures, hinting at early cross-cultural exchanges in artistic technology. You lean closer as he mixes a small batch of pigment, grinding red ochre against a stone slab, adding drops of water until the paste glistens like fresh lipstick. Modern aside, think of it as an ancient beauty influencer mixing DIY fallout-proof paint. No YouTube tutorial required, just trial and error. Fringe whisper: Some believe artisans added crushed glass to pigments to give inscriptions a subtle sparkle under the assumption that shimmering cuneiform would catch a god's eye more readily. Though surviving glass fragments are rare and contested. He dips a fine bristled brush crafted from tamarisk fibers bound to a thin wooden handle and carefully paints over the carved wedges, filling each recess with color. You can almost see the pigment pooling in carved hollows, then sweeping outward in feather-light strokes. Joke break two. It's as if the mask is getting its own manicure minus the spa music and scented candles. Between coats, he uses a damp cloth to wipe excess pigment from raised surfaces, ensuring only the incised lines retain color. You notice the gentle translucence of the clay beneath, turning from dull beige to a warm glowing canvas. The contrast makes cuneiform leap from the mask like neon script against a midnight sky. Once painting is complete, the mask returns to the kiln for a final low-temperature firing, just enough to fuse pigment and clay without warping the shape. You feel the residual heat radiate from the kiln's mouth, carrying the scent of smoldering reeds and baked earth. Mainstream fact secondary firing at lower temperatures around 600 degrees Fahrenheit was common for pigment setting, preserving the mask's fine details while ensuring color longevity. Historians still argue whether specialized kilns existed for theatrical masks, or if artisans shared communal furnaces with potters and tile makers. As the mask cools, he inspects it under a torch's glow, watching how light plays across painted wedges. Each cuneiform sign must be legible from every angle. A poorly cut wedge could distort meaning or spoil a ritual. You trace a painted enlil over a brow ridge, noting how the artisan tapered strokes to hug the curve without breaking mid-character. Fringe rumor, late-night scholars claim that artisans used little magnifying lenses made from polished crystal to check tiny details, though these lenses, if they existed, have left no archaeological trace. You run your fingertip along the mask's surface, feeling crisp ridges under the paint. The finish is matte, yet vibrant, like the colors on a prized collector's edition vinyl record. Modern aside, it's akin to admiring a limited-run sneaker's embossing. Every ridge counts toward street cred. Before shipment to temple or theater, each mask received a final blessing. A scribe dipped his stylus in ink and traced a tiny signature or workshop seal in a hidden recess behind the ear. Mainstream fact excavations at Eridu revealed mask fragments bearing workshop seals, cuneiform tags that read Workshop of Ereshkigal or Seal of Kulaba Maskers. Historians still argue whether these seals guaranteed quality or simply marked ownership, much like branding on high-end instruments. You watch the artisan wrap the mask in straw mats for transport, each one labeled in cuneiform destination owner, and often a brief invocation like, "May Nana smile upon this gift." The packaging itself was part of the ritual, ensuring the mask's arrival remained auspicious. Fringe tidbit: a few recovered packing scraps show traces of perfume floral oils meant to camouflage transport odors and perhaps prime the mask's aura before unveiling. As you rise and brush off stray clay dust, you marvel at the elaborate choreography behind each inscription. Reed stylus for carving, pigment mixing for painting, secondary firing for permanence, scribe seals for authentication, and ritual blessings for potency. It's a multi-step ballet that marries technical precision with spiritual intention. You might compare it to modern special effects makeup, sculpting prosthetics, painting details, sealing finishes, then blessing the actor before they step under lights. The technology has changed silicone alcohol-based paints, electric furnaces, but the core impulse remains: transform a human face into something greater than itself. Joke Break 3. And just like modern stunt doubles, these masks did the heavy lifting, physical, poetic, and sometimes literal when an actor dodged a flying spear. Lean back, close your eyes, and feel the echoes of that artisan's workshop. The gentle scrape of reed on clay, the soft brush swish, the kiln's low roar. You've witnessed the craftsman's secrets, the whispered debates about templates versus improvisation, the fringe theories of crushed glass and magnifying lenses. You carry this tactile knowledge now like a buried reed stylus, waiting to inscribe your own stories. As you let your mind drift from the reed baskets to your pillow, remember that every cuneiform wedge on those curved masks was a testament to human ingenuity, a marriage of craft and belief that continues to inspire makers today. You slip back into the festival arena, the murmur of straw-seat spectators rising like a warm breeze across the clay amphitheater. Masks paraded past you, each one a mosaic of painted cuneiform signs that glowed under torchlight like cryptic hieroglyphs. You feel the charged atmosphere and alchemy not of potions, but of symbols and shadows that transforms a simple face cover into a conduit for collective emotion. As you lean forward on your elbows, you notice how audience eyes flick between actor and text, almost reading the masks like live tweets. Mainstream fact: ancient Sumerian performances often took place on raised wooden platforms called aburs, seating hundreds of spectators who relied on masks, exaggerated inscriptions, and contours to catch every nuance from the back rows. Historians still argue whether seating arrangements followed strict class hierarchies or allowed more fluid social mixing during festival days. Imagine sitting several tiers back, squinting at a mask with painted wedges spelling out Ninhursag's mercy. Those lines don't just decorate, they tickle your imagination, cueing you to feel compassion before the actor utters a syllable. The painted text acts like a silent prompter for your emotions, directing gasps, laughter, or tears at precisely choreographed moments. Modern aside, it's like watching a blockbuster with subtitles in neon. You get the plot and the vibe all at once. Fringe Tidbit A: handful of experimental reenactors claim that well-timed mask inscriptions triggered involuntary empathy, like an ancient version of power ballads, so that audiences would literally shed tears on cue. They've posted proof online complete with slow-motion mask close-ups and straw mat testimonials. But archaeologists raise eyebrows at the lack of peer-reviewed data. You might call it Sumerian soap opera, minus the dramatic music bed. As the protagonist's mask tilts, the painted wedges follow the curve of a frown, and the crowd leans in, feeling a collective chill. Those inscriptions imprint sensory cues, words for sorrow painted in dark pigment, layered over sculpted furrows, amplifying the emotion like a stage fog machine for your psyche. Joke break one, it's theater magic minus the smoke machine paperwork. You recall how artisans carved varied cheekbone arcs in section 4, then painted cuneiform to highlight expressions. Here you see the payoff. A single painted symbol for joy can ripple through the audience, prompting an audible ripple of giggles. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions served primarily as emotional triggers for mass psychological effect or as mnemonic aids for amateur actors prone to forgetting lines. Either way, the result is a synchronized emotional wave that lifts everyone higher than temple incense ever could. Joke break 2. It's like group meditation led by clay emojis. Lean closer, a mask with cuneiform spelling Enlil's wrath stomps forward, lips twisted into a snarl. The audience stiffens. Children clutch small hands, and you feel that familiar shiver of shared suspense. Those painted words prime your brain for danger, almost like seeing warning spoiler ahead on a DVD cover. Mainstream fact textual fragments describe these masks accompanied by percussive drumming and wind instruments, creating a multi-sensory experience that heightened emotional immersion. Historians still argue whether the music was more integral to mood setting than the inscriptions themselves. Fringe whisper. Some late-night storytellers claim that masks painted with certain sequences of cuneiform wedges could induce mild trance states in viewers akin to ancient ASMR hypnosis. They point to anecdotal festival accounts of spectators wandering home, entranced, murmuring Sumerian hymns under their breath. You probably won't survive testing that theory at your next theater outing unless you have plenty of pillow time booked. Joke break 3, Enlil's Wrath Mask cameo at your local improv night might get you a restraining order. You shift in your seat and catch a glimpse of a comedic mask painted with words like laughter medicine, winding around a wide grin. The wedges seem to dance, coaxing riotous laughter from the crowd before a single joke lands. That interplay between sculpted mouth and painted script shapes, comedic timing like cue cards in clay form. Modern aside, it's theater's original laugh track baked right into the mask. Remember the mask mock trial from Section 7 picture? That trial's jury egging on verdicts by reading riotous cuneiform insults painted around actors' cheeks, each insult sculpted to land just when the audience's hokey justice preserve peaked. Those masks were audience microphones channeling communal sarcasm back at the performers. Historians still argue whether participants read inscriptions aloud or simply recognize them as verbal shorthand. As the drama crescendos, a mask bearing Promise of Dawn emerges painted in pale pigments that glow softly against the terracotta. The audience exhales as hope washes over them, a collective release after tension's tightrope. Those words prime your brain for relief, like the final track of a symphony signaling the big finish. Mainstream fact. Many Sumerian plays ended with ritual dances invoking renewal, and masks inscribed with rebirth or light often led that dance. Historians still argue whether those dance masks were reused or ritually buried after one festival cycle. You lean back, the straw mats itch, grounding you to reality, even as your heart still races from the performance's emotional tides. The painted cuneiform on masks isn't decorative window dressing. It's an emotional API delivering triggers directly to your neural network. Modern analogy. Think of it as immersive theater meets mood-sensitive lighting, every wedge a bite of emotional code. Fringe tidbit. Some enthusiasts propose that mask inscriptions doubled as early user experience testing scribes gauged audience reactions to different symbol placements, tweaking future designs like ancient UX/UI designers. They scour pottery shards for wedge alignments and crowd scatter patterns, but mainstream scholars view it as entertaining speculation. Still, the idea of proto-UX research in 2500 BCE is hard to resist. As the final curtain falls, you rise with the crowd, the masks piled behind the stage, resting like silent witnesses. The weight of shared emotion from fear to laughter to catharsis settles into your bones. You realize that Sumerian mask artisans and performers weren't just crafting props. They were curators of feeling, engineers of empathy, and pioneers of audience engagement millennia before streaming analytics. Joke break 4. Just imagine if Netflix labeled every show with wedge-shaped plot spoilers on your remote, no clickbait needed. You gather your things and step out into the cool night torchlight flickering on broken mask fragments you kicked earlier. Each shard bears traces of painted cuneiform, a blueprint for emotional orchestration. You feel richer for the experience, carrying the alchemical recipe for audience connection in your mind. Curve the clay just so paint the right symbols and watch human hearts sway in unison. Lean back into your pillow. Let the ebb and flow of ancient emotions lull you. You've witnessed how painted words on masks shaped perception, steered moods, and bound spectators in communal trance. As eyelids grow heavy, imagine those glowing wedges dancing across your dreams, scripting a finale of serene catharsis and gently guiding you into sleep. You step out of the lingering haze of torch smoke and dust-choked amphitheater air, settling into a quiet alcove where discarded masks lie in heaps like fallen soldiers of a forgotten war. A man steps forward from the shadowed wings, an aging scholar's specter perhaps, and lifts a mask rimmed with chipped cuneiform signs. His fingers hover trembling as if weighing centuries of meaning. This is the crucible of inquiry, where certainty fractures into debate, where every painted wedge invites a dozen interpretations, and where you, dear listener, become witness to the grand tug-of-war of ideas. Mainstream fact archaeologists have cataloged over 50 mask fragments bearing cuneiform inscriptions that reference deities, heroic epithets, and ritual formulas, data points that anchor our understanding of performance practices. Yet, even with this trove of evidence, historians still argue whether those inscriptions function primarily as protective magic narrative labels or political propaganda, each theory splintering into sub-schools like reed mats in floodwater. You lean closer as the man points out a cluster of wedges lining the jaw of a cracked mask. By Enlil's decree speak true. Does this line mark a simple character title, truthsayer, or a binding oath that actors swore before stepping on stage. Fringe tidbit, a renegade camp of experimental historians claimed some inscriptions contained microscopic traces of metal dust, suggesting masks doubled as primitive galvanometers to detect divine presence, though most experts dismiss this as ludicrous alchemy. You probably won't survive a close inspection with those tinfoil hats, but the mental image is irresistible. He brushes dusty clay away from another pupil-sized mask, revealing a faded line, May Ishkur's storms. Guard your words. Is it a mnemonic cue, a whisper to the actor to channel thunderous intensity, or a literal weather charm meant to influence seasonal rains? Historians still argue whether mask inscriptions were meant to act on human emotion, cosmic forces, or both, simultaneously blurring the line between theater and thaumaturgy. As you trace the jagged edges, you recall the pragmatic scribal mindset of Section 3 Cuneiform started as record-keeping. You ask yourself, did scribes adapt that dry functionality for dramatic flair, or did ritual practitioners hijack scribal tools for mystical ends? Mainstream fact. Some masks bear the same invocation formulas found on foundation nails and amulets, objects clearly intended for magical protection. This overlap suggests a shared symbolic language, but historians still argue whether masks were active wards or symbolic reminders of divine guardianship. The man sets down the first mask and lifts another, a comically grinning face with wedges spiraling around its cheek like a laughter soundtrack. This one reads, "Medicine of joy," he murmurs. Was it an early form of playbill, an advertisement of mood, or a genuine psychotropic charm designed to seed happiness in spectators' hearts? Fringe whisper. A select few theorists propose that ingestible pollen residues mixed into pigments created mild euphoric effects under hot stage lights, though lab tests usually find nothing more exotic than crushed minerals and plant oils. Still, who's to say ancient chemists didn't keep a few secrets? You drift between the piles of masks, a silent jury called to weigh competing testimonies. One theory holds that inscriptions were purely didactic, guiding actors and audiences through complex ceremonial dramas, much like modern surtitles in operas. Another insists they were ritual catalysts, each wedge-shaped stroke a vector of metaphysical energy. A third claims they were political tools, branding performers as mouthpieces of temple authorities to reinforce social hierarchies under the guise of entertainment. Historians still argue whether mask inscriptions were top-down decrees or organic folk practices that evolved on village stages. Joke break one. It's a bit like arguing whether emoji exist to express feelings, cast spells on friends, or sell you more phone data, or all at the same time. You crouch to examine a mask inscribed with a sequence of wedge pairs that match an agricultural hymn from the city of Umma. Does that link indicate a crossover ceremony where harvest festivals doubled as theatrical showcases? Or is it evidence of bureaucratic repurposing, scribes recycling old temple texts for cost-effective props? Mainstream fact excavations at Umma uncovered storage jars labeled with identical hymn lines, hinting at coordinated use of ritual texts across media. Historians still argue whether this reflects a centralized temple administration or a network of interwoven local traditions. The man's headlamp illuminates a fragment of a child-sized mask, its inscription nearly worn away under Nana's gaze. I speak. You imagine the youthful performer reciting words through a curved clay mouth, the moon god's name echoing in every syllable. Was it an initiation rite, a rite of passage into religious service, or simply a dramatic device to evoke empathy? Fringe theory. Some late-night raconteurs spin tales of child actors secreted into moonlit rituals, believing their innocence magnified the potency of inscriptions, though official records remain silent on this spooky speculation. Around you, masks of all shapes and sizes lie in silent protest. They bear witness to debates that echo louder than their original chants. You remember Section 6's discussion of vocal priming, Section 5's protective charms, and Section 7's fringe revelries, each new theory building on the last. The cumulative effect is dizzying, like juggling 10 spinning plates while reciting epic poetry. Yet you sense a common thread. These wedges weren't random scribbles. They were carefully chosen signs in a language of power, performance, and persuasion. Joke break 2. If only modern actors had cuneiform subtitles on their masks, imagine Oscar winner stamped on a helmet. It might clear up those ad-lib scenes for all of us. The man replaces the mask and lifts a final piece, an enormous weathered face with blank eyes and a single, bold inscription spanning its brow. He squints, then chuckles. This reads, "By Gudæa's command," straight out of a ruler's decree. Suddenly the debate sharpens into political theater. Were these masks billboards for state propaganda used to broadcast royal edicts during public spectacles? Mainstream fax cylinder seals and votive statues from Gudæa's reign carry identical phrases indicating a deliberate branding campaign. Historians still argue whether such propaganda was subtle persuasion integrated into ritual or coarse coercion unveiled in grand ceremonies. You stand amid the detritus of Sumerian creativity, feeling the weight of unresolved questions pressing against your skull like a too-tight mask. Each theory has merit, each claim a shadow of doubt. You realize the real magic lies not in consensus, but in the collision of perspectives, scholarly debates that keep these masks alive in our inquisitive minds. Joke break 3. It's less a history lesson and more a dramatic reading of footnotes, complete with borderline unpronounceable names. As you step back into the night flames guttering behind you, you carry with you a new appreciation for uncertainty. Those painted cuneiform masks remain as enigmatic as they were when first unwrapped from reed mats. You find comfort in the debates and the fact that the past still argues about itself, inviting you to join the conversation. Each wedge-shaped question is a doorway, each mask fragment a poem with missing verses waiting to be sung. So let these scholarly skirmishes echo in your dreams. Imagine yourself as both actor and audience, painting your own questions across clay and letting them dry under starlight. Sleep gently, knowing that some stories never settle, and that the most enduring performances are those that provoke thought long after the final curtain. You step into the grand plaza before the palace gates, where a procession of masked figures advances under fluttering banners, and the watchful eyes of bronze statues. Tonight, we peel back the verdant wreath of ceremonial splendor to reveal how Sumerian rulers co-opted the very masks we've been whispering about to stage political theater and bend public sentiment to their will. You might feel like you're witnessing the world's first PR campaign, except instead of billboards, you've got painted clay faces parading past your sandals. Mainstream fact. In the Neo-Sumerian period, circa 2100 BCE, rulers like Gudea of Lagash commissioned ritual performances featuring clay masks inscribed with royal epithets and divine affiliations, texts that proclaimed Gudea beloved of Ningirsu, or by Ur-Nammu's command, let none oppose as part of public ceremonies. Historians still argue whether these masks served primarily to legitimize rulership or to reinforce divine favor in a populace hungry for stability. You push through the crowd toes, rustling over littered date pits, and find yourself face to face with the king's own mask, an imposing visage sculpted in high relief, its brow arching above cuneiform lines that read, "Mighty Shepherd of Sumer." The paint, still surprisingly vivid in places, would have gleamed under torchlight, asserting the ruler's sacred mandate before he even spoke. Fringe tidbit. Some conspiracy-minded archaeologists claim the pigment included trace amounts of crushed gemstones. So when the sun struck just right, the mask literally sparkled like a disco ball at a temple rave. You probably won't survive trying that effect at your next costume party without blinding someone. But imagine the Instagram likes. The procession moves on, and you notice how each mask's inscriptions mirror the motifs on cylinder seals and foundation deposits you met in Section 10. It's the same messaging repurposed across media. No wonder historians debate how centralized this propaganda really was. Historians still argue whether temple scribes operated as an arm of the royal administration or maintained independent sanctuaries that occasionally lent texts for court spectacles. You lean against a sandstone column as trumpeters step forward, their horns echoing a martial flourish. The masked performers riff on ancient myths, but the cuneiform on their cheeks names not only gods, but the city-state itself. Uruk lives through Anu's will. Shulgi's reign endures. Each wedge-shaped sign becomes a syllable in the ruler's sonic branding campaign, embedding loyalty deep in the crowd's psyche. Modern aside, it's a bit like a stadium jumbotron broadcasting the CEO's selfie between halftime acts. Corporate synergy, ancient style. Joke break one. If only our modern politicians could stick to one slogan instead of 50 right, make Sumer great again, probably would have fit on a clay mask. You drift to the rear of the procession, where a masked herald recites edicts from a stepped platform. His mask bears cuneiform commands: tax all trade goods, confiscate rebel hearths, comply, or be cursed by Nergal. And though you can't read the Sumerian, you sense the authority in each painted wedge. The mask magnifies his voice, lending gravitas even to every pebble-stomp step. Fringe rumor, late-night reenactors swear that some of these masks had hidden bells embedded in cheek cavities. So when the herald moved, a jingle underscored each decree like a sinister shop door chime, reminding you to pay attention. It's probably more fiction than fact, but it makes a sensational bedtime tale. Mainstream fact records from OR's Royal Archives mention performances of royal glory staged in Fort Shogi's courtyard with masks inscribed by palace artisans. These events seem to have coincided with tax assessments and public oaths, fusing entertainment with bureaucratic rituals. Historians still argue whether the entertainment aspect was primary and taxation secondary, or vice versa, a debate as contentious as whether you actually read the terms and conditions before clicking accept. You recall the mock trial masks of Section 7 where cuneiform could sway a jury. Here of similar tactics blur lines between law and theater. A masked judge flanked by priests pronounces verdicts inscribed on his mask, "Let no false word pass." Hear the humble plea of Gudæa's people mixing judicial tone with royal homage. The spectacle transforms compliance into communal performance, where dissenters risk public humiliation in full view of clay-eyed watchers. Joke break 2. It's courtroom theater so immersive, you'd think Netflix greenlit it, minus the popcorn breaks. You sidle past palanquin bearers lugging a gilded throne mask, not for wearing, but as a static centerpiece, a giant clay icon emblazoned with the king's genealogy, son of Ur-Nammu, grandson of Amar-Sin. The genealogy isn't just prideful bragging, it links the present ruler to divine ancestors, giving every spectator a genealogical souvenir burnt into their memory. Fringe whisper. Some fringe thinkers suggest these oversized masks doubled as early fibrous scrolls, like clay murals that occupied 2 walls at once. It's an entertaining mental image, though nobody's dug up proof. A sudden hush falls as the central mask lifts its chin, revealing a hidden slate bearing the final appeal, "Observe and obey, for chaos dwells beyond my clay." Your heart thumps as the inscribed words settle like mortar in your mind, shoring up the palace's power. The interplay of sculpted form and textual command converts a simple mask into a mobile throne, carrying sovereign presence through every narrow alley and sunlit street. Modern aside, it's like a brand's pop-up shop rolling through town, plastering billboards on every wall. But instead of neon posters, you get living statues that breathe and shout. Much more dynamic, albeit less portable. Historians still argue whether commoners saw these performances as genuine divine encounters or savvy marketing ploys. Did they bow in awe or roll their eyes behind the mask-worn backs? We'll probably never find a viewer diary unless we unearth a clay tablet that reads, "Dear diary, too many clay faces, not enough barley." Joke break 3. If you ever find yourself frustrated by political ads, just be grateful they don't involve clay pigments that stain your face for a week. You wander toward the exit masks, stored in shadowed alcoves, their inscriptions glowing faintly by residual lamplight. Each mask, whether worn by a priest actor or royal emissary, functioned as a 3-dimensional billboard for power structures writ large in wedge strokes. The synergy between word and visage turned every public ritual into an act of persuasion, tying civic allegiance to divine favor and royal command. You might compare it to a modern political rally, flags, waving slogans chanted, and a stage lit like a concert arena. But here, the stage was streets and courtyards, and the logos were cuneiform strokes on sculpted clay. The effect was seamless. One moment, you cheered for a mythic king. The next, you volunteered extra grain for temple offerings, all choreographed by inscriptions hugging the contours of a blank mask. Lean back, let the images drift like lantern fireflies in your mind. Remember the painted crescents of Nana from Section 6, the protective charms of Section 5, the artisan's flourish from Section 8. They all converge here in the theater of statecraft. You've seen how rulers donned masks or deployed them as icons to script public sentiment uniting spectacle and sovereignty. As the plaza empties and torches gutter, you carry with you the echo of cuneiform painted power plays. Sleep now knowing that even the mightiest empires once relied on clay and pigment to rally hearts and minds, and perhaps in your dreams you'll glimpse that glittering ruler's mask one more time, whispering its carved commands as it guides you into peaceful slumber. You wander past the silent mask fragments strewn across the backstage floor, each shard a whisper of an era when cuneiform meant front and center meaning, rather than mere aesthetic flourish. Now, you're witnessing the slow morph from literal inscriptions, full lines of sacred text, to abstract symbols and stylized motifs that evoke ideas without spelling them out. The shift feels almost revolutionary, like watching full sentences condense into impactful emojis. Mainstream fact: by the Old Babylonian period around 1900 BCE, scribal texts and artistic reliefs show cuneiform signs abstracted into logographic symbols, simplified characters that captured entire concepts in a single wedge cluster. Historians still argue whether this transformation was driven by artistic innovation or by a decline in widespread literacy, with elites favoring recognizable icons over complex script. You pause at a mask whose cheek bears a single zigzag line, a distilled symbol for water, replacing the original multi-stroke inscription, "By Enki's waters, let life flourish." That lone zigzag flows like a river on clay, speaking volumes in a glance. Fringe tidbit: a fringe school of thought claims that some artisans encoded acrostic messages in stylized patterns, so only initiates could decode hidden political satire like secret graffiti tagging palace walls. It sounds like conspiratorial scribble, but it does make you squint for hidden jokes in every curve. The air smells faintly of aged pigment and dust, and you feel the tactile thrill of running a fingertip over an iconized sun disk painted above an eye hole. That simple circle with 3 shortening wedges fanning outward once read explicitly as Utu radiate truth, but now it reads as pure solar essence. Modern aside, it's like taking a lengthy movie review and turning it into a single glorious thumbs-up emoji. Recall how in Section 4 masks bore full-faced expressions sculpted into clay. Now those expressions rely more on symbol placement than on sculpted depth. A swooping wedge above a brow ridge stands for joy, while a dotted cluster at the temple signals mourning. The result is minimalist elegance, fewer strokes, broader, emotional strokes. Joke 1. It's the ancient world's version of reducing your resume to a LinkedIn headline, concise, punchy, and maybe a bit cryptic. You crouch to compare 2 masks side by side. One from 2300 BCE bristles with dense rows of painted text, each line naming deities and reciting entreaties. Next to it, a 1800 BCE mask sports only three angular motifs: a crescent for Nana, a wave for Enki, and a starburst for Inanna. The leap from verbose to symbolic feels akin to trading encyclopedias for emojis. Historians still argue whether this economy of sign language made theater more accessible to illiterate audiences or stripped performances of their ritual depth. Fringe whisper. Some avant-garde reenactors insist that the shift to abstract motifs was an intentional move by temple elites to conceal ritual secrets from the general public, an early form of coded access reminiscent of secret menus at modern speakeasies. It's dramatic conjecture, but you can't help imagining clandestine ceremonies behind closed doors. As you trace a stylized starburst, you notice how pigment saturation deepens at its points in artistic choice that guides the eye without spelling out a single syllable. That interplay between shape and shade feels like watching silent film actors rely on exaggerated gestures rather than dialogue. Modern aside, it's like a graphic novel panel, no speech bubbles, just powerful imagery. Joke 2. If only Twitter had started with Sumerian mask emojis, we'd all be limited to 140 wedges. You rise and wander toward a half-finished mask, perched on a low bench, its surface dotted with faint pencil guidelines, where an artisan planned the simplified icons. You imagine the debate at the guild meeting: too many strokes, less divine impact, versus simplify. At the risk of losing meaning, mainstream fact guild records from Nippur mention standard symbol compacts for mask inscriptions, pre-approved icon sets that ensured consistency across festival troops. Historians still argue whether these compacts represented top-down regulation or a collective consensus among artisans. Lean in and listen the brush against clay, the soft scrape of stylus that now carves only a handful of strokes per mask. The whisper of pigment dripped onto the surface. You feel the same reverence as before, even though the language has condensed. The symbolic shift didn't dilute ritual potency. It channeled it into streamlined forms that spoke directly to the psyche. Fringe tidbit: a tiny faction of purists attempted to preserve the old multi-line inscriptions by draping masks with translucent clay veils, letting full texts peek through in flickering torchlight like antique subtitles. They didn't catch on, but the image of a mask within a mask is delightfully meta. Joke 3. Imagine screening a film with subtitles on a sliding panel. Only those subtitles are literal clay slabs. As the lamplight dims, you stand among masks that embody this iconographic evolution, a gallery of minimalist hieroglyphics worn as visages. You almost forget the verbose clay epistles of earlier times, captivated by the power of a single wedge cluster to summon a god or evoke a mood. And though the signs may have shrunk, their impact expanded, carrying the same blend of artistry and mysticism in a more refined package. You step back, letting your gaze drift over the array. You carry forward an appreciation for how human creativity adapts language and image to meet changing needs, transforming long-form scripture into potent symbols that speak at a glance. Historians still argue whether this was a democratizing move or a concentric narrowing of ritual knowledge, but you sense that both impulses roiled together, giving birth to a fresh aesthetic. Slowly, you leave the bench behind, walking toward the exit, where echoing footsteps mingle with the squeak of reed mats. The chorus of cymbals dances in your mind, zigzags, crescents, starbursts, and waves the distilled essence of divine dialogue. You feel the gentle thrill of having witnessed a silent revolution where cuneiform shrank to icons that outlived their verbose predecessors, paving the way for millennia of symbolic art. You step gingerly into a rain-slicked trench at the edge of an excavation site headlamp beam, cutting through dust motes as your eyes land on a half-buried shard of mask rimmed with faded cuneiform. Each fragment seems to murmur stories of stage right and stage left across 3 millennia. And tonight, you'll retrace the moment modern archaeologists first unearthed these painted relics, rediscovering clay faces that had slumbered beneath temple refuse and river silt for centuries. It's like stumbling on a time capsule filled not with paper and photos, but with theatrical masks that carried the voices of gods and mortals alike. Mainstream fact. The first documented discovery of cuneiform painted mask fragments occurred in the 1920s at the ancient city of Ur, led by Sir Leonard Woolley's team, which also excavated the famed royal tombs. Historians still argue whether Woolley recognized the full ritual significance of these masks or cataloged them merely as pottery debris. Some contend he overlooked them as incidental theater trash, while others believe he noted them in his diaries as groundbreaking finds. You drop to your knees, heart pounding with the thrill of first contact, and brush away a layer of silt to reveal a cheekbone etched with neat rows of painted wedges. Fringe tidbit, a handful of eccentric keepers of weird notebooks claim that when Woolley's team accidentally splashed water on one mask shard, the pigment momentarily flaked off in patterns resembling a bull's horn, an omen they recorded as proof of divine endorsement, though modern conservators see it as simple weathering. It wasn't until decades later in the 1950s that a French expedition at Nippur reassembled multiple fragments matching shards like puzzle pieces to recreate half a dozen masks. Mainstream fact. Those mid-century digs employed ceramicist George Renner, who painstakingly pieced together shards and used early photogrammetry to record inscriptions. Historians still argue whether Renner's reconstructions faithfully reflected original mask shapes or introduced subtle biases, given the limitations of early reconstruction techniques. You imagine Renner hunched over a workbench, tweezers in hand, aligning tiny fragments like a relic-scale jigsaw, each wedge a vital clue. Modern aside, it's like restoring a shattered vinyl record, except the grooves are wedge-shaped script, and the music is the echo of ancient chants. Joke break one, if only Renner had a spare reed stylus to scratch in missing wedges instead of glue, would make for a messier lab notebook. The breakthrough came when a Polish team in the 1970s applied ultraviolet light to mask fragments revealing faint pigment traces invisible to the naked eye. Fringe whisper. Some lab notes speak of eerie luminescence that made inscriptions glow under UV, as though whispering in neon, prompting the team to nickname the masks Sumerian nightlights. It sounds delightfully spooky, but UV-induced fluorescence can also be a simple side effect of mineral binders in the paint. You crouch by a glass display case where a reconstructed mask dubbed the Uruk Oracle sits behind plexiglass, its forehead painted with the words, "By Shamash's judgment." You lean in nose, nearly grazing the glass, and feel a jolt. This mask was buried in a foundation pit alongside votive deposits, only to be spirited away and reburied in a museum climate-controlled box. Mainstream fact conservation reports note the mask underwent electrolyte cleaning to stabilize pigments before display. Historians still argue whether such cleaning erases evidence of ritual wear. Some claim conservation is a second burial, while others see it as preservation for posterity. Fringe tidbit rumor has it that a late-night security guard whispered that in the quiet hum of the museum's after hours, the Uruk Oracle mask seemed to shimmer as if channeling Shamash's gaze. The guard claimed the sound systems occasionally crackled at the mention of the deity's name, though the museum's PR office attributes it to faulty wiring. You back away imagining the mask's original context tossed aside after a festival buried with offerings to mark its retirement, then lying forgotten until modern spades unearthed it. The cycle of use, discard, and rediscovery feels like a time-traveling theater troupe, each fragment a performer waiting for an encore. Mainstream fact: several masks were found in stratified temple refuse layers at Girsu and Lagash, embedded alongside broken instrument fragments and libation vessels. Historians still argue whether these disposal pits were respectful retirements or unceremonious dumps. Modern aside, it's kind of like tossing out last year's Halloween costume, only that costume is emblazoned with divine hymns and might come back to haunt you. Joke break 2. At least your plastic pumpkin won't spark scholarly debate when someone digs it up in 82 AD. The most dramatic rediscovery occurred in 2003, when a joint Iraqi-American team used ground-penetrating radar near Ur's ziggurat to locate a hidden cache of mask fragments sealed in a clay-lined vault. Fringe whisper: local lore speaks of an ancient map found scribbled on a pottery fragment directions to a vault of many faces guarded by ghostly puppeteers. Archaeologists dismiss it as fanciful storytelling, but you can't help imagining secret chambers waiting to be found beneath shifting sands. You join that 2003 dig in your mind. The vault door gives way with a brittle crack. Lighting reveals dozens of mask pieces, some still clinging to original reed-padded storage racks. Mainstream fact: the vault's contents included masks inscribed with both full cuneiform epistles and the later abstract icons of Section 12, offering a rare chronological snapshot. Historians still argue whether the vault's sealed state indicates a ceremonial cachet for safekeeping or an abrupt abandonment due to political turmoil. As you visualize carefully lifting fragments onto padded trays, you notice odd residues, tiny fragments of reed matting, and traces of palm wine. Fringe tidbit: a few cheeky conservators joke that performers who stored masks here must have enjoyed a celebratory drink afterward, hence the spirit residue. The pun earned groans in lab reports, but it's hard not to smile at the thought of Sumerian mask makers toasting their own handiwork. Joke break 3. Imagine toasting your own props after a show, though it might muddle use and care protocols. At least you'd have an epic post-performance party. You rise from the trench wiping wet clay from your knees and survey the scattered fragments around you. Each mask shard tells a dual story, the original performance ritual and the journey through modern archaeology. You feel a kinship with those early explorers, Wooly Renner and the radar team, as they coaxed voices from clay and returned them to public view. Mainstream fact, today's digital modeling technologies allow virtual reconstructions, enabling scholars to wear 3D scanned masks in VR reenactments. Historians still argue whether virtual experiences can ever substitute for tactile engagement with the real objects. As the rain drips from your hood, you tuck that VR hope into your mental toolkit. Imagine donning a digital mask that replays ancient hymns in your ear, no earplugs, required just a headset and imagination. You see the future of rediscovery biosensor feedback, triggering whispered incantations as you navigate virtual temple stages. Fringe theory. Tech futurists speculate on AI-infused smart masks that could reconstruct missing cuneiform strokes algorithmically, though nobody's coded that feature yet. You step back into the present, the mask fragments glinting in your headlamp's circle. You carry with you the thrill of rediscovery, the accidental splashes, the painstaking reconstructions, the spectral rumors, and the cutting-edge rescues. Those painted clay masks have survived millennia, buried, broken, and reborn, so that tonight you could trace their arc from ancient performance to modern spectacle. As you wipe rain from your lamp, let the ghosts of archaeologists past beckon you forward. Rest easy, knowing that even the most stubborn clay eventually gives up its secrets one painted wedge at a time. And in your dreams, you'll join Wooly's team, trowel in hand, uncovering the next mask that bridges our world to theirs. You settle into your favorite reading nook head, propped on a soft cushion, and you'll hold a glossy program from a downtown avant-garde theater troupe. The cover features a striking photograph, an actor wearing a clay mask etched with stylized cuneiform motifs, illuminated by moody LED lights. Tonight, we journey into the 21st century renaissance of Sumerian mask inscriptions, where contemporary artists revive ancient traditions in experimental performances, gallery installations, and immersive exhibitions that bridge past and present. Mainstream fact. In 2018, the Brooklyn-based theater company Mud and Glyph debuted Echoes of Enlil, a site-specific performance in a converted warehouse featuring handcrafted clay masks inscribed with neo-cuneiform text based on translations from Ur's temple hymns. Historians still argue whether such modern adaptations faithfully honor Sumerian ritual contexts or commercialize sacred imagery for entertainment value, a debate echoing back to Section 10's discourse on political versus devotional mask use. You flip through the program's glossy pages. Fringe Tidbit founder and mask maker Aya Greenleaf claims she once mixed her own pigment from ethically sourced river clay and pomegranate husks to capture authentic Sumerian hues, though critics whisper she actually buys pre-mixed earth pigments on Etsy and adds a pinch of theatrical license. You probably won't survive guessing her paint formula in a blind test, but the story adds an indie artist mystique. The program notes describe how actors recite reconstructed hymns through masks that amplify acoustics using hidden 3D printed resonance chambers, a modern twist on Section 6's primitive reed tubes theory. Modern aside, it's like strapping tiny subwoofers to your face, giving every whispered line a cinematic boom. Joke break 1. At least the only thing you'll regret is accidentally ordering the bass-heavy upgrade for your morning Zoom calls. You turn to a feature on multimedia artist Jamal Ortega, whose gallery installation Clay Code invites visitors to inscribe personal intentions in cuneiform on rotatable mask sculptures. Each masked head rises from a shallow pool of water, an homage to Section 2's clay as living medium concept, so that inscriptions dissolve, then reappear overnight through projected light mapping. Fringe whisper. Some patrons swear the dissolved glyphs reassemble in their dreams, forming cryptic messages tailored to their anxieties, though neuroscientists chalk it up to pattern seeking in REM sleep. Mainstream Fact A 2021 Symposium at the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute showcased digital masks overlaid with AR cuneiform animations, allowing audiences to swipe through layered inscriptions like Instagram filters. Historians still argue whether this digitization dilutes the tactile authenticity central to Sumerian mask craftsmanship, or democratizes access to ancient scripts for broader audiences. You trace your finger along a page, showing a performance photo dancers clad in flowing robes move in unison masks, glinting under ultraviolet LEDs that reveal hidden fluorescent cuneiform patterns, an echo of the 1970s French UV rediscovery from Section 13. Modern aside, it's reminiscent of late-night rave glow sticks, except the symbols are ancient blessings instead of neon ninjas. Joke break 2. If your high school chemistry teacher saw those pigments, they'd assign you a life sentence for chemical misuse. You recall Section 12's discussion of abstract icons replacing verbose inscriptions, and you see modern mask makers adapting that minimalist ethos. Simple glyph clusters represent digital age motifs. Wi-Fi signals, hashtag curls, emoji-like wedges, superimposed with Sumerian forms to comment on today's information overload. Fringe Tidbit, a punk theater collective in Berlin, once staged Bite and Clay featuring masks inscribed with binary code alongside cuneiform, claiming to hack ancient wisdom for digital rebellion. Whether that counts as homage or sacrilege is still a hot debate in fringe circles. Mainstream fact: the Royal Shakespeare Company experimented in 2022 with cuneiform-inspired mask projections in their production of The Tempest, using overhead projectors to simulate painted wedges over actors' faces in real time. Historians still argue whether this digital layering honors the intention of painted clay or relegates the practice to mere special effect, stripping away materiality. You pause at a program blurb on theater designer Marisol Choi, who handcrafts silicone masks engraved with stylized cuneiform, and then hand paints them to mimic fire clay textures. She explains that silicone's durability allows touring companies to avoid the fragility of terracotta while preserving the visual punch of ancient masks. Modern aside, it's like wearing an eco-friendly cosplay helmet minus the risk of ceramic shards in the audience. Joke break 3. The only thing less breakable these days are your phone screens, and even they crack under pressure. You leaf to a review of Digital Dynasty, a VR experience where participants don haptic gloves and a lightweight mask frame that displays virtual cuneiform glyphs shifting in response to vocal intonation. This immersive homage channels Section 6's idea of vocal priming, letting you feel the resonance of Sumerian hymns in your bones. Fringe Whisper. Early testers reported mild vertigo and poetic inspirations the next day, claiming the experience unlocked ancestral memories, though psychologists suggest a strong placebo effect. Mainstream Fact A, to add a 23 lecture series at the British Museum, examined how contemporary mask artists consult Sumerian epigraphers and cuneiform specialists to ensure textual accuracy, even as they adapt signs into new aesthetic contexts. Historians still argue whether these collaborations amount to respectful cross-disciplinary fusion or awkward academic cosplay that blurs the line between scholarship and art. Turning the last page, you'll find a personal essay by an actor who credits her discovery of mask inscriptions with helping her process grief. She describes painting her grandmother's name in Sumerian wedge forms on a ceremonial mask before a memorial performance, an intimate callback to Section 5's idea of masks as protective amulets. You feel that echo of personal ritual transcending millennia. Clay as canvas for both public spectacle and private solace. As you close the program, you sense the continuity woven through time from temple courtyards and ziggurats to downtown black box theaters and digital arenas. You've seen how artists today channel ancient craft-shaping painting, projecting and digitizing wedge-shaped strokes to evoke the same blend of ritual storytelling and emotional alchemy that Sumerians first engineered. Historians still argue whether these revivals honor original intent or create entirely new mythologies, but either way, the spark of cuneiform on clay lives on. Lean back, let the glow of those modern revivals wash over your mind like UV painted wedges in a darkened gallery. Imagine yourself crafting your own mask, clay or silicone, physical or virtual, inscribed with words that matter to you. Sleep with the thought that you too can join the ongoing performance of history, linking your voice with those who first painted cuneiform on clay faces 5,000 years ago. You slide your hand across the last heap of clay fragments, each one a testament to the enduring conversation between shape and symbol that began in Sumerian courtyards and ripples through every masked performance ever since. Tonight, you draw the final arc in our narrative, how painted cuneiform on clay masks carved a path through time, influencing cultures, inspiring artists, and embedding itself in the very DNA of theatrical storytelling. Mainstream fact: by the 6th century BCE, Greek theater had adopted large expressive masks, possibly inspired by Near Eastern prototypes, complete with exaggerated features and painted details that echoed Sumerian conventions of visibility and projection. Historians still argue whether Greek mask traditions derived directly from Mesopotamian practice or emerged independently under similar performance pressures. You lean closer to a fragment inscribed with a single weathered wedge. It feels like a breadcrumb leading out of the Sumerian stage and into centuries of ritual drama. Fringe tidbit: a small cluster of speculative historians suggests that Atlantean voyagers, yes, those eternal tour guides of myth, transported cuneiform mask techniques across the seas, seeding lost civilization's own painted mask traditions. It's almost too fantastical to believe, but it makes you glance at waves differently next time you're by the shore. The lineage is visible in Roman pantomime masks that displayed bold brushstrokes for comedy and tragedy in Japanese no masks, where minimal painted lines convey entire emotional worlds, and even in the stylized horror masks of modern cinema that rely on painted symbols to cue fear. You can feel those ancient wedge forms echoing in every painted brushstroke, every carved contour that architects of performance still exploit. Modern aside, it's like detecting a 5,000-year-old bass line looped through every hit song on your playlist, ancient DNA encoded in contemporary art. You recall Section 2's reverence for clay as living medium and see it reincarnated in today's ceramic therapy studios, where participants mold faces and inscribe personal mantras before firing. You think of Section 8's artisan techniques, mirrored in master potters, who still use reed styluses for detailing. You remember Sections 5 and 6's protective inscriptions reborn in modern prayer pots, where people sketch blessings in clay to shield loved ones. Mainstream fact ethnographers have documented over 20 cultures using painted or inscribed masks in healing ceremonies, from West African Agungun rites to Balinese barong dances, each borrowing in spirit the Sumerian fusion of word and image. Historians still argue whether these global mask traditions share a common ancestor or represent convergent evolution of human ritual. Joke break one, it's as if ancient Sumerians invented the original emoji masks, and we've been remixing their code ever since. No app download, required just a bit of clay and imagination. The academic debates rage on. Were those early cuneiform masks functional tech, portable spell books and prompters, or brilliant marketing tools to draw crowds? Do modern mask makers honor or appropriate sacred heritage when they paint stylized glyphs on silicone? You sense that the real story lies in the messy overlap of technology, religion, and performance, an overlap that thrives on ambiguity. You think of how digital game designers now texture virtual avatars with ancient scripts to lend authenticity, how tattoo artists trace cuneiform lines on skin as permanent masks of identity, and how stage designers project neon wedge forms in multimedia spectacles. The impulse to marry symbol and surface remains irresistible, an artistic echo chamber that started with a wedge stylus pressing into soft clay. Fringe whisper. Late-night internet forums chatter about secret theater troupes who paint live cuneiform on body and mask, simultaneously chanting rediscovered Sumerian hymns to hack the collective unconscious. It's borderline performance art and borderline paranormal claim. But it underscores the mask's magnetic pull on our creative psyche. You stand at the threshold of history, recognizing that every age reinvents these painted masks to resonate with its own anxieties and aspirations. The Sumerians painted cuneiform on clay to bridge human and divine. The Greeks sculpted masks to amplify emotion. No masters carved wood to channel spirits. Modern creators use silicone and projection to fracture reality. All across this expanse, the core idea remains: inscriptions on a face-shaped canvas elevate the ordinary into the mythic. Historians still argue whether the magic lies in the pigments, the text, or the communal belief that binds performer and audience. You dear listener, hold the answer in the quiet between breaths, the understanding that art is a dialogue across time, one you join each time you don a mask or watch another wear theirs. Take a moment to trace a final wedge on your mental map, a silent promise that storytelling is both ancient and alive, that each painted symbol echoes with countless voices, and that your own dreams tonight may bear the imprint of those wedge-shaped glyphs. Let your breath slow, releasing the final echoes of painted clay and ancient footsteps. Imagine the ground beneath you softening like cool mud, the campfires dwindling to embers that glow softly at the edge of your mind. The masks themselves have set aside their roles, resting in shrouds of straw and dust, their inscriptions fading into whispers of memory. You drift alongside those whispers, buoyed by the rhythm of your own heartbeat and the gentle cadence of night. Feel the air settle around you, each inhalation a soft caress, each exhalation a quiet release. The wedge-shaped glyphs you've traced across centuries now dissolve into strands of starlight weaving through your thoughts without urgency. No questions remain to chase you, only the warmth of connection, the shared humanity that bound Sumerians and modern storytellers alike. Allow the ancient clay to cradle you, its cool weight guiding you toward gentle surrender. In this moment, you're neither actor nor spectator, but a tender witness to history's lullaby. The boundaries between past and present blur, and you float in a vast canvas where all voices converge in a hush of understanding. Let go of any remaining tension. Every muscle softens, every thought slows, every mask grows quiet. Soon, the embers of this narrative will fade entirely, leaving behind the soothing glow of remembrance. Carry with you the essence of those painted inscriptions: protection, invocation, expression. They are gifts now your own, and they rest gently on your dreaming mind. Sleep now, enveloped in the soft hush of clay and cuneiform, guided by ancient guardians toward peaceful slumber. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.